Now, farmers flocked to London last week to protest inheritance tax changes. From April 2026, landowners who inherit agricultural assets worth more than £1 million will have to pay 20% inheritance tax on them, assets that were previously entirely exempt from the tax. Well, Chief Executive of the TaxPayers Alliance, John O'Connell, has been talking to our reporter Bridie after hearing Angela Rayner's refusal to rule out further inheritance tax hikes at Prime Minister's questions last week.
Anything over £1 million with some other reliefs thrown in will be charged at 20%, and that's going to cause big headaches for lots of businesses. Farmers have been prominent in the news, of course, because they're a classic family-owned business that's passed down from generation to generation, often on extremely low incomes, sometimes in the low tens of thousands, so the returns on investment at farming are extremely low. And then, of course, if these changes come in to then pass that on to the next generation to continue farming the land, it's likely that lots of farmers will be hit with an enormous bill, somewhere in the regions of hundreds of thousands in many cases, which they simply won't be able to afford and will therefore have to sell up.
If not inheritance tax, where do you think these taxes should be coming from?
Inheritance tax brings in about 7 to 8 billion a year. That's forecast to go up slightly. In the scheme of total revenue raised, which is somewhere closer to $1 trillion, it's actually rather small amount of government revenue. So for us, we think that if you want to treat all assets equally, the easiest way to do that would be to actually abolish inheritance tax. There's a lot of economic distortions caused by the tax. There are lots of lawyers and accountants hard at work trying to help people reduce their inheritance tax bills, meaning that people with lots and lots of money don't actually ever pay it, and people on middle incomes are the ones that actually get hit by it. So there's a lot of economic distortions for rather a small amount of money in the scheme of how much money is raised. We think that government should be looking at its own spending first. People talk about how can we plug this and that black hole with different tax rises here and there, but actually we're not addressing the first primary question, which is how much is government spending, what is it spending it on, and how can it spend it more efficiently? And 7 billion, you could think of all sorts of things. We currently send around 14 billion overseas in aid. In fact, the TPA just found yesterday that we send around 500 million to overseas farmers when we're looking to raise 500 million from domestic farmers. So, there are lots and lots of ways that we can plug 7 billion by looking at spending, as opposed to constantly thinking, right, okay, we've got to spend this much amount of money, just how can we dig into people's pockets a little more, when in fact the government should be looking to do its own job much more efficiently.
What have you heard from farmers since this announcement has been made?
Well, we actually went down to the farmers' protests, both to talk to people down there, but also for our own recording and these kinds of things. And it was really interesting. I think one of the key things we found was, first and foremost, that the protest was very respectful. It was very tidy and clean afterwards. There was lots of food brought down for a food bank. There was a minute's silence at the cenotaph for farmers who had fought and died for the country. So it was good to see such a respectful but vibrant protest on the day. What they were saying was much of what we've heard in the news, that they do this because they love it. It's a vocation. They don't do it for the money, clearly, because the margins are so tight, and they'll be in many cases on some of the lower incomes across the spectrum. And when people are saying, well, look, your farm's worth, for instance, 6 million quid, it means you're rich. It's not. It's worth 6 million on paper, of course, but they have no intention of selling it. That's the whole point. They want to pass it down from generation to generation. They want to keep farming the land. And we have to remember that they're doing quite an important job, which is growing food. And in an increasingly uncertain world, we can't continue to rely on imports for all of this stuff and think that the world's going to be lovely and peaceful as it's been for the past couple of decades. Unfortunately, things aren't looking as golden as they were. So having some sense that we can look after ourselves if we need to. I mean, COVID proved it as well. So they're doing a tough job on really low margins. But I think it's important to also add, it's not just farmers, it's other family-owned businesses. The changes in the budget, of course, looked at business property relief as well as agricultural property relief. And there's a similar theme running through that. Entrepreneurs who have set up a business, who, you know, love to work for themselves, work all hours God sends on their business, you know, again, quite often for small margins, but they do it for the love of what, you know, providing for customers, you know, working for themselves, not relying on somebody else for their salary and their wage. And we have to remember those people too, because this is going to be exactly the same impact. They won't be able to hand on this business in quite the same way. And that's a huge shame when, at a time when we need to encourage economic growth, we're telling entrepreneurs, actually, we're coming after you.
John O'Connell from the Taxpayers Alliance there.